Butterflies, joy, love, marriage, complications, arguing, divorce. No one goes into a union with the intention of divorce. Yet every hour, over 86 divorces in the U.S. occur. Divorce can rip away everything we know, cared about, and loved. It can shatter what we built and our hopes for the future. It impacts our children and our well-being. How can this be? How did we get here? Am I doing the right thing? Why did my marriage have to end? What does this mean for me and for my children? The answers are here. MedCircle's course on divorce, the Divorce Recovery Roadmap, guides you through a progressive healing framework, provides expert advice and techniques, gives you access to actionable resources, immerses you in a supportive community, and of course provides live access to our doctors answering your questions every step of the way. Breathe again. Find joy again. Dream again. Live life for you again. Start your healing journey at medcircle.com. I'm so excited to be joined by clinical psychologist, Dr. Ramani. Dr. Ramani, welcome to MedCircle.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to see you, Kyle.
Always great to see you. Could we start, Dr. Ramani, with briefly touching on your personal and professional experience with relationships and divorce?
Listen, I've been divorced, right? And so, even if as I watch introductory material, I think that divorce is I think it's as we live longer, it happens. I don't think it has to be a disaster in a person's life. I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think anyone gets married thinking they're going to get divorced. But again, that's why this course is so important. So I've been divorced, and it's been a long time. I've been divorced longer than I was married at this point. And, it's certainly not what anyone hopes for, but you kind of figure it out. Professionally, it's something I walk a lot of people through in my area of working with folks who are going through narcissistic relationships, making the decision about whether or not someone's going to, proceed with the divorce. These are often nightmare divorces, when people have those kinds of relationships. So helping people navigate that nightmare, co-parenting. Listen, if they're coming into my office, it's probably not going smoothly, but I also have many, many friends who are divorced, and that's on a continuum. For some people, it was, nobody wanted it, but they have found their footing. And, I personally consider my ex somebody I talk to relatively regularly. We co-parent our kids. We spend holidays together. So we found someone I consider a friend, someone I would step in to help. If he were sick, I would help him. So, I view this as a person who's an important person in my life, but in that committed relational structure didn't work. But for I've seen everything from people who really get on well enough, it's just that the marriage part didn't work out, down to absolute, complete and utter disaster. So I've seen the whole continuum. I tend to see more of the rough stories though, because I work with people who are going through narcissistic relationships.
Yeah. What happens when they're experiencing trauma or abuse and now the monumental task of getting a divorce?
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare because when the relationship's already having these toxic dynamics, because so often in relationships, using narcissism as an example, there are often issues around abandonment, loss of control of the narrative, concern about how things look to the world. So it's what you'll see from the more antagonistic person in the relationship. You'll often see a lashing out. You could see everything from, at the most extreme end, things like stalking behavior and behavior that, sharing inappropriate things with kids that they're not ready to hear, that can really pull kids away from a healthier parent, financial abuse, divorces that are protracted forever to the tune of a lot of money. So they can be very, very, very punitive. I've seen that version of it. I've seen, cases where people just don't know what to do around family court. They're not able to afford the kind of legal guidance that they need. So they often feel very misled. Family court is actually not well set up to help people manage these divorces with very antagonistic sort of, co-parents or partners. And so as a result, people can often get very harmed simply by the system that's designed to help people through it. It can be very, very expensive. Folks like me who do work in this area, we call it the divorce industrial complex. A lot of people are making a lot of money in this process. And so, even though it's this sort of human misery, the more conflictual it is, especially on one side, I should say, the more money that's often exchanging hands. And the divorce itself can become a new source of trauma. So the relationship itself was harmful enough, but then all of the shenanigans and abuses and all of that of this period of breaking up. And what that means is some people will start putting a tentative toe into the process of divorce and say, this is too overwhelming, or I can't afford this, or I'm terrified, and all of this other stuff. Some people don't quite understand how divorce laws work. And that's a very interesting conundrum, Kyle, because you're signing what feels like one of the more binding contracts of your life, but there is no moment of small print. When a person goes to get a marriage license, they are not given paperwork that describes community property, division of assets, how custody works. None of this is explained to people on the front end. And so you throw those terms around, no fault, community property, joint custody, but they don't actually really know what this means. And so now people are in something where they're like, oh, that means this, or how spousal support is calculated, how child support is calculated. These things are just not talked about. And so as a result, with all the emotion, because obviously a divorce doesn't happen because people are like, yeah, I'm not feeling this. Like, it's happening usually because things are going wrong. And especially in issues where the relationship is psychologically harmful, emotionally abusive, or even worse, where there's coercive control, things like that. People are not ready for what this whole process is about. And those systems that broker divorce, the court system, aren't ready to manage antagonistic relationships. And then you hear nonsense that people are told. So, for example, I've had so many clients say they are clearly dealing with sort of a narcissistic abuse situation, and they're speaking to an attorney or a mediator, and they'll get an offhanded comment like, oh, everyone thinks their ex is a narcissist in a divorce. Actually, no, everybody doesn't think that. And that's an important piece of information. And so there's a lot of different pieces at play here. And it takes a tough situation, makes it worse. And the process can be so terrifying and so unsettling for some people that they actually pull back and say, maybe the nightmare that this relationship is less nightmarish than having to actually go through this process of divorce.
Yeah. Well, we're going to jump into 5 things that Dr. Ramani suggests we don't do during this process. And I want people to really listen, y'all. I'm not saying you have to try all 5, but, at least put them into your toolbox of options. And if you really want to take a larger step in moving through this process, in the link of the description of this video, rather, there is a link to the divorce course that features Dr. Ramani. And I can tell you, I just reviewed it again this morning. And not only is it beautifully shot and produced and edited, it is just chock full of the nuances, the information, the clarity and insight that a lot of people going through this are seeking. So you can check that out at medcircle.com or in the description of this video. So Dr. Ramani, first up, the first pitfall that we're going to discuss is that we shouldn't isolate ourselves.
Yeah, this is such an important one because when a person is going through a divorce, they're going through a process in most cases, people have never been through before. And if they're coming out of a antagonistic or toxic relationship, they may be even more gaslighted than they ever were before, more confused than they were. So that the harms of a harmful relationship become worse when a person's isolated. Having supports of people to talk to you about how you're feeling, what you're going through. In an ideal world, some of those supports have been through a divorce before, but people who see it and get it. I will say this, that I think sometimes the only thing more harmful than the narcissistic relationship are the enablers, the people who say ridiculous things to you like, are you sure? Or have you thought this through? Or was it really that bad? It's really important as you bring together support that you be discerning. All support is not good support. Some support is not going to work at this time. So it's really about people who can be present with this, who aren't doubting you. You've already doubted yourself 1,000 times. And so it's people who are, listen, that people who can be supportive, who actually offer more instrumental support too. It might be help with picking up your kids from school, or, just being there, especially, you don't know what kinds of depositions and hearings and all this other stuff that are being thrown at you, that having some support, having people sometimes bringing over the dinner or whatever it is, those things can go a long, long way. So you do have to be discerning, because you might have a network of friends, but not all of them are ready to hear it. But you can't do this alone. And part of that also might mean being in therapy, that having a therapist that you can talk to who understands divorce and what this looks like, and who isn't judgy and isn't saying, have you tried everything? And you have a therapist who can be there in a very sort of genuine, open, validating way. All of these things become a really, really important source of sort of sanity and feeling less confused and feeling supported and held while you go through the experience that can feel quite isolating, especially if you're losing friends in this divorce, which some people will say, like, yeah, my ex kind of got to everyone first and sold their version of events, and now I got no one. Like, a lot of people sort of bought that version of events, which can really add to the devastation and the grief. So having some supports becomes absolutely key.
I know I use the word isolate, and so maybe I'm conflating two words here, but when I'm depressed or I'm going through something really tough, I like to be alone. Isolation sounds nice. So how do I balance that? What's your response?
I think that I think you bring up such an important point, that this isolation can sometimes be secondary to shame, right? So people feel as though, listen, we talk about divorces as failed marriages, which already that implies like you did something wrong, right? That this was, instead of really almost, I really do think that people should get married for 10 years at a time and then have a re-up in 9 years and revisit and say, like, you in for another 10? We don't, even a mortgage only lasts 30 years if you do it right. So, like, why not have those re-ups? I really think every couple should do that. I know it sounds silly, but this old till death do you part, we're living to be 95 years old. I don't know what I want at 95. And so I think that that people feel like it's a failure. There is a lot of shame. And so when we feel ashamed, we isolate. It is not good for us. I understand what you're saying, Kyle, that sometimes when we're going through something, we want to be alone, and that's understandable. But then you really have to dig into what that's about. You wanting to be alone just as a place where that's how you you kind of get back in your body, and that's a place of rest, and you feel like, I don't have to explain this for the 100th time. Okay. But if you're doing it because you're like, I don't want to be judged and I feel ridiculous, and like, you really do feel it's from a place of shame. And sometimes it's a hybrid. It's not always either or, but being aware of that, or even having those friends who are a soft touch and who can kind of read the room with you and say, I'm going to come and check in on you. Then okay, you give yourself some time. But it's really easy to get deeper and deeper and deeper in that hole. And the more and more alone we get, the more and more the shame can kind of sort of run, kind of roughshod over us. And having people to talk to can sometimes leave us feeling like, okay, I'm not the only one here. And that's why sometimes talking to people who've been through divorces can be the most helpful thing. We know this from mental health in general. Talk to a person who's going through what you're going through, because that becomes that space of, especially if for example, you're going through a narcissistic divorce, talk to someone who's been through a narcissistic divorce, because they're going to say, oh, honey, this is exactly how it goes down. And all of a sudden you feel a little more sane. And then it's because I think that the term isolation, Kyle, is already a loaded term. Isolation implies something that is unhealthy. To me, it's sort of like, taking time for yourself, finding time to just sort of breathe. And that's not isolation. Isolation is an intentional cutting yourself off from other people, usually for unhealthy reasons, such as shame.
Yeah, I get that. Let's move to the second point. And I love this one because it's something that before I went through your divorce course, I would have not even thought was a possibility. And that is that we may forget to ignore, avoid, or delay the grieving process.
Yeah. So divorce is loss, and loss means grief, and grief must be gone through. And some people, when they go through divorce, interestingly, are relieved. They're just happy it's over. Like, oh God, we don't have to live together. This is all fine. but it is still a loss. You had been in something, and yes, some people might have been processing those losses while the marriage was going on, but it is a loss, right? Something is about to change, and we have to give loss space. Like when someone dies, that's a much more obvious loss. We have a funeral, we have a period of grieving. There's people come together. That doesn't happen. There's no funeral for a marriage. And in the absence of those rituals, we have to take the time. And for some people, that can look like very unhealthy grieving processes. Like either they don't grieve and they throw themselves into a frenzy of activity and, might, start doing things like dating right away, or, kind of doing like the whole merry widow thing and going out on the town like, I can do all these things now, right? But that could be sort of stopping that process of grieving, or thinking like, I wanted this divorce. There's no loss here, but there is a loss here, And so I think that it's holding space for that and doing it in real time, slowing down a little bit, catching your breath, exactly the things we might do if someone died. That the world has changed a little bit. And again, talking in therapy, all of those things, journaling, all of those things can be useful. But some people say like, okay, this has been going on for months. It's been going on for years. It's no biggie. So actually some of the best advice I ever got was from actually one of my own mentors who said, and he'd been divorced, and he said, listen, you've got to remember to take the time to grieve, because if you don't, it will come back and it'll find you. And it'll surprise you at that point, because you're thinking, it's been 2 years. Why am I grieving? Because grief is something you cannot outrun.
I hope I can explain this eloquently. We have a course on grief too, on bereavement. And one thing that really blew my mind when we were making that course, and Dr. Lamb phrased it much better than I'm about to, but is that some people are pushing down, avoiding the grief, and having anger, frustration, outbursts, maybe even physical symptoms. And they go, well, yeah, that's because I'm grieving. And she would argue, no. It's because you aren't grieving. The grief is how we get through this. And I think a lot of people mistake the symptoms of holding back their grief for the actual grief.
Yeah, no, I agree. And listen, anger is a part of grief, right? If we look at Kubler-Ross's stages, we see things like denial and anger and bargaining and depression and acceptance. And then we look at David Kessler's work and we get into meaning and purpose, right? And these cycles don't go linearly, right? This idea that there's one after the other after the other. Now, some people go from denial right to depression, and then back to bargaining, and then acceptance, and then pop back to anger. And so it's a very, very sort of bouncy, protracted process. So even some of that anger may be on track, but the idea, like saying, I think that we do live in times where we've managed to manage everything else. Like we can sort of find tech or tools or something to sort of overpower everything in our lives. Grief is one of those things we can't do. It has to be felt, whether it's cried out, talked out, felt out, and it's uncomfortable. So people don't want to deal with it. It's understandable. And because this doesn't fall under the usual definition of grief, it's not a death, which is usually where we annex the term for that, which doesn't fit. It's really basic. Divorce is a loss. It's a loss of you were viewed as a married person. Now you're not a married person in the world. Again, your kids, if you have kids, are now living in a different way. A lot of things are lost. And even if you're sort of resigned or even glad for the divorce, there are other things that are lost. But yeah, you can't outrun it.
Yeah. Just as an aside, Dr. Ramani, what do you think about all these people who have divorce parties? Some people don't like them and some people love it.
I think it's great. I think it's great. I really, really do think it's great because listen, it may be like you will say, well, what about the grief? Listen, grief doesn't mean that you wear black and you walk around the world crying all the time. It's that sometimes you're going to say like, whoo, this is taking me out for a minute. Maybe I need to slow down my work stuff. Maybe I have to, have my expectations be a bit more realistic. It's really about giving ourselves time. Maybe I have to go to bed earlier. It's okay to sleep in. It's okay to get a little bit of take in. Like it's okay to take care of me. I think a divorce party is great. I think it is I think what you have to do if you're having a divorce party and you have kids, you want to be careful. Because I think that if you were to draw a lot of attention, heaven forbid your kids are home or they see pictures of it on social media, that could be offensive to them. because the thing that you're celebrating is something that's blown up their lives. So there has to be a certain, I think, sensitivity to this. You also want to be mindful of what's your other partner going through, because not all divorces are these big antagonistic spaces, right? In some cases, it's two people and there's a struggle for both, and one may be struggling differently. So it is, again, it's that mindful self-awareness. Would having something be celebratory here be hurtful to someone else if this is sort of put out there publicly? I think you just have to be mindful of circumstance. Listen, some people will go on I don't think anyone's ever said this, but like a divorce moon. I'm sort of coining that term here, which is going on a trip, like for the first time, maybe alone, to say, I'm going to take some time for myself, but for the first time, travel on my own and have some time to myself in this place, because maybe when they were married, that person always ruined trips and all these kinds of things. I don't think that there's any problem in celebrating it. I think one has to be aware and mindful. Listen, Kyle, some people get so screwed financially, or they lose the house, or they lose their stuff. Sometimes they have divorce showers. Like they're like, I need a new mixer, lost that one, and could use a new frying pan because I lost that too. And I say, why not? Because the person doesn't have the thing and could use the pick me up. I just think it's about sort of reading the room. And if a person's going to have some form of a celebration, be aware that this could be seen by others, or just, don't broadcast it everywhere. But it's hard these days. If even one person decides to put it on social media, something that felt sort of like, okay, I'm going to lean into my new future, could potentially be hurting exactly the people you don't want to hurt.
Yeah. The divorce course follows a 6-step process that's led by Dr. Ramani, and you also get access to a community of individuals who are going through something very similar. Dr. Ramani has said it, all the MedCircle doctors have said it, and I have heard it from nearly every lived experience interview I've done, is that the thing that helped them through whatever was their community, their support system, the people in their lives. And sometimes those people mean well, but they're not going through a divorce. And like Dr. Ramani said, you want to talk to somebody who's going through what you're going through. Well, those people are at MedCircle Community, and we would love to have you join us. I want to share a sneak peek into one of the lessons that's included in this course. So take a look at this.
When we're going through divorce, we often move the way that fear makes us move, right? Which is tentative and holding back and very, very focused on what's right in front of us. And switching from fear to explore with curiosity and pull away from fear, keeping it private and doing your utmost to lift that self-judgment. Journaling can be that one place where you can sort of let your thoughts run free in a completely non-judgmental space, and to hold space for yourself compassionately. And a great place to start with journaling is to ask yourself the fundamental question, where are you now? And to really dig into that. Where are you emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually? And lay that out. Some people even draw out their journaling, and that's fine. But then reflect, where would I like to be a year from now? Or 3 years from now? Or even pin that to your children's ages, when my children are 18 and might be living on their own. As you think about that sort of future orientation, you might catch yourself and ask yourself, is this too difficult to think about right now? And if it is, it's okay to say, I'm going to come back to that. I can only think about the hour in front of me. And that in and of itself is an important piece of information. As you write down your feelings, and you're noticing feelings like sadness, anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, frustration, or anger, what other feelings do you think you're supposed to be feeling? Because you feel what you feel, right? There's no supposed to. But negative emotions can be quite overwhelming. And for you in your journaling to think about what might help you manage these negative mood states. Things to also reflect on as you journal are sort of, what does daily life look like now? And if you feel up to it, to think about, where would you like it to get to? Journaling is also a place to lay out for yourself what you think your biggest struggles are. But you can also take a different tack in your journaling and ask yourself, has this transition brought out changes in my life that I actually like? It can often be hard to think about that. Journaling can also be a place where you can reflect on things like barriers and obstacles, or anything that might be stopping you from living your daily life in a way that feels most healthy and most authentic. Lay that out as you journal. And as you think about removing those barriers or sort of making those switches, What do you think your daily life would look like as things maybe sort of settle? Again, divorce is a transition. And what do you hope settling down looks like? And as you continue this process of reflection, what would help you get those daily practices into place to create some of those shifts for yourself? So much of what we go through in a divorce is so much logistical stuff. It's legal documents, and it's parenting agreements, and it's sign on the dotted line, and it's financial agreements, that we forget that there's also a lot of feeling that needs to be managed. We also forget that really it's daily life that often takes up the most of our attention. And so while the big ticket stuff may always be looming there are still the routines in your life for you to think about, how is this going to look differently now that I am leaving this relationship, now that I'm getting a divorce? And where do you want this to go for you? However you envision this, journaling becomes a place to sort of let these kinds of thoughts and feelings run free. It can actually be quite helpful. You'll find that if you do write this down and put it away and pull it out years from now, you're going to see how far you came. And down the road, that's its own sort of legacy and inheritance you've given yourself, because you'll say, wow, I really did a lot of this. When we're going through divorce, we often move the way that fear makes us move, right? Which is tentative and holding back and very, very focused on what's right in front of us. Allow yourself to widen that lens and see a little further down the track. May not be a year or 3 years down the track, but what do you want your life to look like next week, next month, at the end of the year? You might be able to use more manageable kinds of windows of time. And switching from fear to curiosity is really a huge transition. And healing through the process of divorce and using journaling as a place to do that, to explore with curiosity and pull away from fear, keeping it private and doing your utmost to lift that self-judgment, to approach journaling from a place of self-forgiveness and self-compassion, can be one place that you have that sort of becomes your kind of field to explore that nobody else needs to know about. Put that stuff down, because sometimes you might find it may not feel helpful now, but in a year or two, it may be a very reassuring companion.
Is Dr. Ramani not so good, y'all?
I can't stand watching myself. So
I know nobody likes
me.
it.
I'm like, ooh, Lord. I was playing the game on my phone.
Hey, whatever you need to do to get through it. My favorite thing that you said in there is one of my favorite words when it comes to mental health, and that is curiosity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For so long, when I had to look at my depression or anything really, I did so with fear and judgment, or shame, maybe all three.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I just heard about looking at this through some curiosity that I go, yeah, I can do it that way. I can look at all of these things that I've been trying to look at, but from this whole nother lens. And all I had needed was to be told that I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was an option instead of always going to default. Do you have any thoughts on your sneak peek lesson?
Yeah, I think that curiosity is an incredibly powerful sort of intervention in and of itself, right? We're sort of taught to dread our feelings, run away from our feelings, but it's extraordinarily helpful. Almost imagine taking your feeling in your hand and sort of rolling it around in the light and being curious about it. Curious about how we feel, curious about the circumstance we're in. Unfortunately, in going through something as painful as divorce, the more distressed we are, the more traumatized that we are, the more anxious we are, the more our capacity to be curious sort of gets hampered, and we're much more in survival, reactive fear mode, right? Which is why anything that can kind of bring us into the moment, help us feel sort of more regulated, that would allow us to feel more curious. Because I think, a great example in divorce would be that you're thinking, this was not a healthy relationship. I was not growing in this. I was stuck in this. And here I am sad. This doesn't add up. Maybe I made a mistake. Oh my gosh, I did the wrong thing. Versus be curious about this. And being curious about it then can lead you to realize, like, this is actually bringing up, this is a loss. Even though I was unhappy in this marriage, there is still a loss. There was still a belief in, in marriage. You might have had parents who were divorced and thought, I'm going to get this right. I'm going to make this last. And that it didn't last. And that, and then you start thinking like, okay, this feeling is a lot more complicated than I thought. It may link to other earlier experiences in your life. But when we're curious about something, we can be with it in a very, very different way. But I'm not saying that that's always easy, especially the more sort of panicked and on edge and sort of physiologically aroused we feel, the less we're able to do that. And so that may not be something someone's doing straight out the gate, but as time goes on, especially as a person feels more regulated, there's the possibility to get to that place of having more curiosity about how you feel, how you behave, what's happening.
Yeah. Well, if you're watching this and divorce is in your past, present, or you may think it's in your future, there are helpful techniques and guides available to you. Dr. Ramani takes us through all of that through her divorce course right here on MedCircle. And it also includes a digital workbook, which will give you plenty of space to do that journaling that Dr. Ramani was mentioning, to get all of that out on paper, guided science-backed exercises, lots of pretty charts and graphs. It's a beautiful workbook as well. So it's supposed to be something that you can go to at your own pace, at your own time, and have those moments and have those aha moments that come when you pursue this type of healing and education. Let's go into the third thing that we don't want to do when we're getting through a divorce. And I have a follow-up question on this, Dr. Ramani. Maybe you'll answer it, but don't rush into dating and new relationships.
No, there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, again, let's just have the conversation where there's kids involved. It's way too confusing for your kids. I feel it's really a lot for your child that, they're maybe living under very new circumstances. One of their parents is out of the house, and now all of a sudden this new person is being brought into their lives, and they're supposed to adjust to it. The kind of accommodations kids are asked to make after a divorce are actually really probably too many. We do see, for example, the narcissistic parent. It's not unusual for them to feel like their parents need to get their kids, I should say, need to get right on board with their new person, that the kid's being selfish if they don't do that. That's sort of a narcissistic parent move. But even if you're the healthy parent, right, you're the more protective parent, I would say, this isn't even about don't introduce your kids to new people. Don't rush into a relationship. Some of you might have been in these relationships for years. And the pushback I hear is like, Dr. Ramani, I have been lonely in this relationship for 5 years and you're telling me to be alone for longer. I'm like, yep, because now you really are out of it, right? You're no longer doing the workarounds, being performative, even pretending anymore. You're in a real life. You need to figure out who you are. What do you like? What don't you like? What are your preferences? Who are you? What do you stand for? What are you about? And you can't do that if there's someone else around. And so giving yourself that time to sort of breathe and be you and go through at least a year's worth of anniversary dates of literal anniversaries, holidays, birthdays, start coming up with your own traditions, because so much, I mean, listen, marriage, even a healthy marriage, there's a lot of accommodation and compromise and sacrifice. Have some time where it's just about you. And then with time, move slowly into something new. But I think that what it does is when a person sort of views getting into a new relationship as a priority, first of all, it can thwart the process of grief, which remains very real. It can be confusing to kids. It can actually, if you have not healed whatever those patterns were from the prior relationship, you may repeat them in a new relationship. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of reasons. And again, my recommendation for people who go through narcissistic relationships is 1 year, nothing, no sex, no nothing, no sexy texting, no dating apps, no dating, nothing. And most people, after they get through that year, have no problem going longer. But it's that your people think I'm wasting time. No. This is the most important time you'll ever spend. It's less confusing for you. More importantly, it's less confusing for kids. And some people find this hard, especially if the ex goes rolling right in to new relationships. Well, it ain't a race. And you take your time with it, but taking your time and kind of putting on the brakes and doing the work of you for a minute is absolutely crucial.
What if your boyfriend or girlfriend is part of the reason you're getting a divorce. So you naturally are moving in from one relationship to the next.
Yeah, well, again, I'm always going to bring it back to the kids piece of this, right? I personally, this is my bias,
Sure.
but when you have, especially when you have minor children and even kids in their emerging adulthood, which still their brains are still working like they're teens and kids, is they're the priority, right? They're the priority. And I understand you might want to put the focus on that you may have had, met someone outside of the relationship, and that might even have been what pushed the accelerator on the divorce. Okay. If you have kids, to me, this feels like a no-brainer. Your kids become the priority. And if this person's going to take a walk because you're going to take the time you need, then this was not going to be someone who was going to understand the
Good point.
workarounds of
Good
getting
point.
into a relationship with someone with kids. So you've now weeded out a sucker early in the game instead of finding that out down the road,
Really
right?
good.
It's a bad look. I hate to say it, and I don't mean to feel judgy, but it's like now you've given the world a narrative, right? Like, oh, left this one for that one, and
Mhm.
it's really that, and that made it's rarely that simple. But I'm telling you now, people are going to make it that simple. But if you have kids, this is a no-brainer. Your kids and a new routine with them and getting them accustomed to this, that is a singular priority. Now, some of you are saying, I don't have kids. This is me and that person, and we split up, and I had a new person. Maybe not a year, maybe it's not that long, but again, it also comes to the self-awareness. Not all divorces involve narcissistic, toxic relationships. Maybe it just you grew apart, it stopped working well. Yes, you drifted into something new, which already again is going to bring some sort of social critique on you, but it also may be painful for your ex-partner to watch you, who may again their behavior wasn't narcissistic and antagonistic and manipulative, but it just wasn't working. It can be painful for someone to watch that happen.
Mhm.
So be aware. Like, there's empathy is one of those gifts that gives to us in many, many different ways. And being able to look back and say, I'm very glad that I proceeded very, very carefully in those many months or even year after the breakup. And, more than anything, even if you do decide to take up with a new partner right away, please don't put it on social media, because the
Mhm.
fact is, as a married couple, you had mutual friends. And
Mhm.
now your mutual friends are sort of like, okay, awkward. In fact, someone was recently telling me a story. I don't remember what the context was, but they were talking to me about people who had split up. And it was because it's holiday time. That's what they were talking about. And in this case, this person was narcissistic, this ex, but wanted to bring a new girlfriend or new partner to a holiday dinner that traditionally they went to with their ex partner. And the people hosting it said, no, absolutely not. We're not doing this.
Wow.
We are friends with her. We are friends with both of you. This year, because this particular year, it was like for a variety of reasons that I think maybe the expert person wasn't going to be around or something. And they said, no, this doesn't feel right to us. And I really credit those folks with doing that, because that the other partner in that divorce felt very seen and heard and supported, in the sense that, these people set a boundary. They said, we'd be happy to have you come alone, with your kids and all of that. We're good with that, but we're not doing this. And so it puts mutual friends in a tricky position, who may, again, have had friendships with both of you. Over time, give it a minute to breathe. People may rise to the occasion and say, okay, I'm glad to see you found someone who makes you happy. But if the ink isn't dry and you're doing this, it does become a tricky position that people are being put in, and they're being made to feel like they choose. But with kids, this is a no-brainer. Absolutely not.
So I want to stay on this for just one moment longer. How do I really know when I'm ready to date? Because can't I go through my whole year and still not be ready for dating?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I
how
think
do I know when I'm ready?
Kyle, I think there's a couple of things. Yeah, many people say to me, I feel weird. I'm 2 years out. I don't want to date. I'm like, there's nothing weird about that. They'll say my life is good. Like I'm spending time with friends. I have hobbies I like. I stay busy. Work keeps me busy. I'm traveling. They've gotten used to doing some things alone. So they're good. I said, if you feel good, that's good. Like, again, we're sort of like, I understand that human beings value relationships, but not all relationships have to be these sorts of monogamous, I'm with you and you're with me and you're my person sort of stuff. Like women do great in social groups, by the way. Like women do really well. Like in fact, the ultimate retirement plan for a lot of women would be just live with your friends in a big house and you'd probably be okay.
Well,
Because
can
women,
I
you know,
please come for dinner? That sounds.
yeah, everyone wants their gay friend in
Yeah.
in their women house. You could come. Yes, absolutely. And you can tell us if we look good when we look out. Let's play to every stereotype, Kyle.
Yeah.
So no, but yes, I think the gay men get to be in the women houses. But in all seriousness, I read an article about women who were doing this. They were buying a home together and they found that there was a lot of support there. And a lot of women, because remember, divorce can happen at any age. It can happen to someone when they're 25, it can happen to someone when they're 85. But some people will really find that they're like, I'm 2 years out and I'm actually good. I like living alone. I don't want ever to share my space with someone again. I don't want to make room in the dressers. In fact, one woman I met, absolutely inspiring. She met a man. She'd been divorced, tough to divorce. She met a man. She fell in love. They got married. But she said, I will never live in the same house as you, ever. And them's the conditions, buddy. And he's like, great. And I think they live like, I mean, it's like a 20-minute walk kind of thing from each other and 5-minute car ride. And she said, it's great. And I said, how many nights a week do you spend with each other? She's like 2 or 3. That's about it. And she said, it works great. And they have their own spaces and they come together and they love it and they enjoy it. So I think the reason I tell you that is that there's more than one way to have a relationship, and that some people may find that they met someone in another city and they see them maybe once a month. They're like, that's about all I need. It's a companion. We travel together. We have fun together, but I'm good the other 3 weeks of the month. And I think being open to the idea of alternatives that sort of meet you where you're at is having that flexibility. And it can be challenging because a lot of people aren't down with sort of more, I don't know, the whole range of options that there can be. And so I think it's important you trust yourself, and then also trust that the process can be organic, that you might not even be looking for someone. You spend time, you become friends. But I think that if a person feels like they're not ready, maybe they'll never quote unquote be ready. And I don't think that means that there's something wrong with a person. Maybe it's just not their groove. Like they tried it and they're like, yeah, no. I mean, listen, Kyle, I'll never get married again, ever. I don't believe in it. I don't want it. Never, ever, ever again will I ever get married. So I know that about myself. Yeah.
I'm not planning on getting married.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
And if my boyfriend wanted to get married, I'd go, can we have the wedding and the party and the whole shebang, but not bring paperwork into it? That would be my ask. I hear you.
Yeah. So I think that people understanding that, and there are people out there, Kyle, more than you might know, who might listen. A wedding doesn't imply that legal thing happens usually like in a city clerk's office,
Right.
So people might do the whole thing and actually never have gotten legally married. And when the times comes for them to split up, they're like, oh, is it a lot of paperwork? But actually, we never signed on the dotted line. And so I agree with you that and I have to say, it's interesting you say, we're talking about gay men, is that I talked to a gay friend who, when marriage was first becoming legal in states like New York, Connecticut, things like that. And I just made an assumption. It was actually very presumptuous. And I feel like actually unkind of me that I made the assumption that they were getting married for financial reasons, right? Because I've always viewed marriage as sort of a financial vehicle, a way to protect assets, a better tax filing basis, property transfer upon death. And he's like, no, we've signed very thick prenups. One of them had more than the other. He said, because this is meaningful in society, right? It's a meaningful commitment. It means something historically through human history. And as a gay man, I was cut out from this. And it was very meaningful that I could have this public statement that I'm committed to my partner for a lifetime. That was all it was for him. It was nothing financial, nothing like that. There was a public statement. And I think that idea of digging into what is relationship, what is marriage, what do these things mean? I don't know that everyone's always doing that. And I think if people would probably be coming to very different kinds of decisions together.
Mm-hmm. Really inspiring. You and I once had breakfast and a similar topic came up, and it really, and you said it so bluntly, we get to decide what our relationships look like.
Yeah.
And I go, yeah, I forget that. I forget that they're supposed to be this way because that's what every single person in my life does their relationships. So I'm supposed to be this way. So, y'all, I hope you were inspired by that as much as I am, because it's permission to live how you want to live, and sometimes we need to hear it. I do. Let's go to our fourth mistake, and then we got one more mistake. We got two more mistakes, y'all. This one I'm really good at, comparing yourself to your situation and to others.
Yeah. So comparison is the death of joy, right? You got to remember that.
Is that
so?
Brene
I think so. And she's so smart. Let's give it to Brene Brown because she's so smart.
You can have it, honey.
Right? So, but it's when we compare, we veer away from our own experience. And in a way, it's almost like a way of distancing and dissociating ourselves from our own experience. Now, the problem is social media exists only for us to compare ourselves to other people, right? That's why it exists. So I can look and see, wow, your refrigerator's more organized than mine. You actually get up and exercise. You had oops, I hope you can still hear me. Can you still hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. You had a better vacation than me. That's what we do on social media, right? So it's that social comparison is really, really at a fever pitch at this point in history. And it's but I think it's always been a thing, right? And that social comparison kind of keeps us in line. And the problem with social comparison is it puts an artificial pressure on us. Maybe I should already be dating. Why is my divorce hard? How come things worked out so differently for her? Why did she get that much custody? Why did he get that much more money? And on and on and on and on. Is that then what happens is people kind of distance themselves from their experience, their story, what works for them. And so it's the sort of, well, everyone else is doing this, so maybe I should be doing this too. And it really can be challenging because then you might get stuck in a track that's not relevant to your divorce, right? Or actually could make things worse. And it is there. I do tell folks when you're going through these big relationship kinds of transitions, to the degree you could get off social media, the better, because you, especially at times of, really evocative times of year, like the holidays, where you're seeing everyone getting together in their matching holiday pajamas and they're this and they're that. It's a very sort of family fetishy time of year. So it can be very, very hard. So I'll say, listen, one of the easiest things would be to not see it. And taking a break from it, or really trimming it down so the things that are showing up on your feed aren't those people who sort of leave you feeling on your back foot. Maybe one day when you feel stronger, you can bring them back up. But it really can lead people to making choices that are not the best choices for them. And kind of getting in sync with you and knowing what's right for you is so crucial. But that comparison can lead people to question themselves at every turn, and especially in a process where there are a lot of decisions to be made, and having those decisions be influenced by people who have nothing to do with your circumstance, or very different, or we don't always know the full story of someone's story, can lead us to, like, again, doubt ourselves, and that can feed more distress.
Let's go to our fifth and last mistake: forgetting about self-compassion.
Yeah. So, self-compassion and all the components of it, mindfulness, common humanity, the idea that you're not alone and this other people are going through this, self-kindness, self-forgiveness. It becomes so important. I think that we're in such a perfectionism oriented time. I've got to get it all done. I've got to be productive. I've got to get the schedule. I've got to out-parent my ex. I've got to show the world that this isn't bothering me.
Yeah.
No, you have to understand that there are, pizza has food groups in it, and sometimes we don't get out of our sweats, and that this is a really hard thing. And self-compassion is holding space for our mistakes, for being kinder to ourselves, to recognize that anyone else in this situation would be struggling, staying in the present moment, and not getting so caught on, like, well, I should be farther along, or how did I let this happen? That sort of thing. And so, that it's not about self-love. It's not about, what do you call them, saying the affirmations as you stare in a mirror. It's really about, I'm doing the best I can under these circumstances. And sometimes that's not neat and tidy. But as I said, going back to my social media comment, so many people are putting out artificial, curated, false versions of their life. Kyle, you know as well as I do how many times, in fact, I had a client who said to me, I actually felt betrayed. She was following some such and such fancy influencer, famous person on social media who was always proclaiming her love for her husband. My husband and I, we are love. We've written a book on love. Every day is full of love. And then like 6 weeks later, they were announcing their divorce. And
Okay.
so the person seeing it said, I kind of felt betrayed because you were selling me this sort of pseudo love story. Everyone is selling a story, right? And so, but we're being told that it's real life and
Yeah.
it's not. And so
Yeah.
self-compassion is that honestly, if there was a place called honest social media, there would be a lot of sweatpants.
Yeah.
There would be a lot of cereal being eaten for dinner.
Yeah.
There would be a lot of dishes in the sink. And
Yeah.
so, and people like, saying, oh my gosh, I did not wash my kids' underwear. So we're going on an inside out on this one. So it's that's life. And unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing. And I think as a result, going back to that comparison piece, they sort of that idea of the self-compassion, and the most central tenet of this is, if you had a friend who was going through a divorce, what would you be saying to them? And then say that to yourself. Because my guess is the things you're saying to yourself, you'd never dream of saying to a friend because they'd be really mean.
I love the friend metaphor. It is, I remind myself of that. I'm off social media, y'all. I'm telling you, Dr. Ramani asked me how I was doing. I said, Dr. Ramani, I wake up every day. I'm so happy. I'm just trying to ride the wave and appreciate the goodness. And I'm not saying it's because I'm off social media, but it's certainly helping.
Helps, Kyle.
Yeah,
it helps a lot. It really, really does. I'm going to tell you now that sometimes people say, oh, I saw this great clip. But see, for me, who works in this space, I'm like, how do they know to make such a nice clip? I'm like, I can't even watch the clips without wondering, like, well, I should be doing more clever things.
Yeah, exactly.
Forget it. I can't do it.
Exactly. I know. And even my poor friends, I go, oh, you're so happy at dinner, aren't you?
But they're not really, right? Too much, you're going to find out.
So even the people I know in real life, right. I'm like, you posted on social media. Okay. Okay. So we got two more things we're going to do here. Let's go to this great message all about courage from Dr. Ramani, and then we'll have final words from Dr. Ramani when we come back from that.
I actually think courage is one of the most applicable topics to divorce. There is a lot of courage that gets pinged in a divorce. It's the courage to go and start a new life after having sort of attempting to establish it one way with one person. It's the willingness to reinvent and rediscover yourself. It's the willingness to even face some of the stigmas and biases that the world has against divorce. I think there's a lot of courage when a person gets divorced, and especially in a world where we still look at people who got divorced as having, quote unquote, done something wrong, chosen badly, as though that they're flying in the face of so-called family values. So it is actually quite courageous to buck a kind of conventional tide and say, no, I am not going to try to win the family values medal by staying in a relationship that doesn't feel right. Or you may not have wanted this divorce. So there's a courage in having to face a new life that you may not have chosen for yourself and still sort of get up and fight the good fight every day. That's also quite courageous. I think anyone who can weather a massive transition of any kind, in which divorce is a big one, there's something quite courageous that you keep on keeping on and still try to show up as a good parent, as just a good person in the world. That's courageous.
How do we develop more courage?
I think that all of us are probably more courageous than we think, right? I think that the fact that given the mess that the world is right now, that we actually get up and sometimes have a smile on our face, it's pretty darn courageous. So I think we save the word courage for people who are going off into battle and doing these sorts of big things. But in fact, courage is often a million small things that we do every day. When we take a chance and we go on a first date, that's courage. When we go to our first sort of social event after a divorce without our spouse, that's courage. When you...
But I know that is courage. Does that build more courage?
That builds more courage. So when you keep taking these chances, you go on that first date and you're like, okay, the world didn't end. I could do that again. Or you go to that social event. I could do that again. Or you go on your first trip alone. Like for some people, they're like, I've never booked an air ticket on my own or stayed in a hotel alone. They're like, that wasn't so bad. In fact, it was kind of cool that no one was yelling at me while I checked into the hotel or let me have the aisle seat. Like, that was actually really pleasant. That builds courage. You may do it again. And so courage is pushing through something despite the fear. And you do that by trying things and pushing through the fear and recognizing it's a bit like the efficacy. Courage is a better brand. But Kyle, there's a courage in being one's own self. There's a courage in being authentic. There's a courage of showing up in your true self, right? Because that's an incredibly vulnerable position because you're thinking, if I show up as my true self and I'm rejected, what then? Well, I'll say what then is that you are your true self. It ain't going to work for everybody, and that's okay. That's what courage is. And we're so socialized to be what other people want us to be rather than what we are. Divorce can be a real catalyst to saying, listen, if I've been through this, I might as well try to show up as my real self and see what happens. And you'd be surprised that the kinds of relationships you do build are extraordinary. And the people who don't want any part of it, well, you just weeded out the suckers.
That's right. That's right. Time to do a little weeding, y'all. By the way, I look so much better with this filter on and the and what we're doing today than that course. That course, I was like, look at how rough Kyle looks. See, nothing's real, y'all. Filter.
Nothing's
real. How I feel.
No.
And I have great lighting. Okay, Dr. Ramani, when somebody finishes going through your course on divorce, what can they expect to experience on that journey coming out the other side?
Listen, divorce, like so much else in the world of mental health and the world of relational experiences, is on a continuum, right? And there's going to be people who are going through an incredibly toxic divorce. And my hope is that what they've gotten from the course is that, yeah, this is going to be harder than it is for other people. But there's some pitfalls I can avoid, and I can understand that I'm walking up a steeper hill than other people. I think that for everyone to recognize that, even though people do get divorced, and it happens, and there's certainly not that level of stigma there once was, it's still difficult, right? And we still experience it as a failure, and sort of this course becomes a place to build up some of that self-compassion. It's also giving people an understanding of that there is grief, that there is loss, even if this is something that you wanted. How to make decisions, like if we're on the fence, like I'm not sure what the right way to go is. I'm not saying that this course is a definitive place to tell you all the right choices, but it gives you some perspective. And I think in the macro, that's really what this course does, is it gives people perspective as they go through an experience that often is very different for every single person. And your friend's divorce will look and feel different than yours. And a divorce you read about someone going through is going to feel different. And to recognize that while there are some universals, every single one of these divorces is an incredibly different experience. And so that this course is really, I think this course becomes what people make of it, how they use the journaling, how they use the exercises, because there's a lot of opportunities for self-reflection, and those self-reflective portions of the course really do become a place for you to customize this for you. And so thus, if you are going through, for example, a narcissistic divorce, to understand that it does feel different, and it almost doesn't matter that it's different for someone else. We talk about this don't compare piece, is that this is your process, your story, you whatever, whoever is in this, kids, extended family, money issues are going to be different for everyone. And so the idea that you can make this your own is really what I hope, so that you recognize that the universals are there, but your story is your story, and your process of healing of this from this is going to be different than it is for anyone else.
Yes, yes, yes. Come join us in the MedCircle community in this divorce space. You'll meet others going through the same thing. You'll get access to this 6-step course. You'll get science-backed strategies to help relieve some of those anxious moments or tense moments. And you'll also get to see me and Dr. Ramani a whole lot. Good or bad, that's what you're getting.
Good or bad. That's right.
Dr. Ramani, thank you so much. You know how I feel about you. Everyone knows how I feel about you. And I know you don't read comments, but I was just thumbing through them, and everybody is just saying how thankful they are for you, how much you've helped them through their divorce, how much you've helped them in dating and relationships, in clarity and understanding. I mean, there are thousands of people watching, and they're echoing all of
I'm
those.
so grateful.
Thank
Well, I
you.
think that that's all that anyone ever wants was clarity and validation, and everyone deserved that. And if I was able to provide a little bit of this in this process, I'm very grateful for that's a privilege.
We'll leave you, dear viewers, with this short video on the divorce course featuring Dr. Ramani on Med Circle. Have a good one.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Ramani, and I want to welcome you to this course on navigating the psychological aspects of divorce and going through this process in a far more informed way. This is not an easy process. And whether you're in the place where you're making a decision about whether you're going to get divorced, you're going through it, or you're coming out of it, or even you've been out of it for a while, it's a complicated space, and it's one that can bring up so many conflicting feelings. This course will be an opportunity to go beyond just the practical issues and the logistics of divorce. But my hope is that as you go through this course, you'll understand that there's a very, very important psychological process you go through. This isn't as simple as I'm going through divorce and this is tough, but I'm going through a divorce. And this means getting reacquainted with myself. The beauty of this course is that it's a progressive framework, and this is designed to help guide you through your divorce. And it takes on a range of topics, including children, grief, and even what it feels like to lose parts of a social support network. The course also includes therapeutic activities that you can access at any time, that you can use repeatedly during your healing journey. And a really important feature is that there is going to be a community, a virtual community, but filled with individuals who are going through divorce as well. And there will also be live events from a variety of professionals each week that will allow you to continue your growth during this process and give you more information that you can add to what you've learned in this course. The beautiful part about this course is that I and Med Circle will be there to guide you through this process as you navigate the really complex space of divorce, and to provide supportive resources as you go through this process. So please join us in this course on your healing journey, and really understand that this is an opportunity that, although you're going through an incredibly difficult time, it's an opportunity to find joy and meaning beyond the divorce, and look into a future where, while it might feel difficult now, where you can see very different kinds of possibilities and rewrite your narrative. So I do hope that you find in this course that resonance, as well as that oh so important sense of community that will help you heal from what can be one of the most difficult transitions you will encounter in your adult life. Thanks again.